and it's a topic I love discussing. I generally make everybody break into song, and I'm going to show you the lyrics. We have a couple little jingles that I put together over the years. This goes to the tune of Johnny Cash's "I Fell Into a Burning Ring of Fire." I suppose can't really tell if everybody's singing along, but it goes something like this. I fell into a burning LMS fire. Our servers went down and the prices got higher, and it burns, 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 that LMS fire, that LMS fire. You kind of get the point. I think if you've been doing this for a while, you've probably had the same experience. And we're just going to, I'm not really that great of a presenter, but I kind of can tell some stories on occasion. And so I'm going to tell you a story. And it goes like this. Once upon a time, as you can see, the year 2001. In a land far away, that land happened to be Oklahoma, southwestern Oklahoma, the heartland of the United States. Some of the pictures there are pretty interesting to me. Um, the far bottom right-hand corner is actually a picture of me. We had a cooperative agreement with Shishong Normal University in the Yunnan province in China. And on that Mac notebook, although Apple, in my experience, does not have a lot of free tools, we were busy using. Back up just a second. We were busy using a free tool, an H.323 client, and I was doing a video conference back to Oklahoma in that very picture. I grew up in southeast Colorado. The book title there is The Worst Hard Time. It's a story of the Dust Bowl and Depression in the U.S. in the 1930s. The picture in the lower left-hand corner is a picture of my children evacuating from some of the wildfires that we experienced. The picture that I'm zooming in on is actually my aunt and a guy named Frank Eaton. He's affectionately known as Pistol Pete. He's the mascot for Oklahoma State University. And over here, just to the right, there's a little dot in the sky. That dot happens to be the space shuttle. Where I lived prior to taking my new position in Casper, Wyoming, was Altus, Oklahoma. Altus, Oklahoma is home to Altus Air Force Base. And they fly transport out of there. Let's see what's happening here. Seems like it's being a little sluggish. There we go. There we go. There's a good picture of the space shuttle on the back of a couple of the transports. And as the story goes again, there was a kingdom surrounded by great flying machines. And as we take the story further, many wise people gave us much to think about. 1997, we began going on a set of best practices visits. One of those was to the Colorado Community College system. When we walked in the door, the president of that system told us they're coming and there's nothing we can do about it. They said they'd had requests for courses, and it began changing our thinking on distance learning and technology. Then in 2004, I was in the Savannah, Georgia Moodle Moot, and Jason Cole said this line: "Why do I go to Google when I want to learn something instead of taking a course from my own college?" That one's sort of scary to me. I do this presentation quite a bit to educators, and nobody ever has an answer for this one. You know, we all do this. We use some sort of search tool, be it Google or whatever it happens to be, but we're out there and we're looking for information, and if our educational institutions don't deliver content to us quickly enough, we go look for something else. And at any random trade show, I've had guys telling me this for a long time. I'll get the sales team to get you pricing. That's actually really one of the things that as I began stumbling upon open source tools and technologies. It was a great relief for me. I'd gone to trade shows for years and years and years, ran into really tremendous products, and I've always worked at small rural institutions without huge financial resources. And it was always somewhat discouraging to walk away because we knew we weren't going to be able to deploy some of the things we were seeing. Right, hang on one second there. Where are we at? Here we go. As the story goes, or the fairy tale goes, along the line of what the Colorado Community College System president was telling us, it was really true. Virtual mounts allowed everybody to come into our kingdom. More trouble came upon the land. Pictures that you're seeing here are a portrait of rural America. Out-migration, storefronts are boarded up. The red counties are population loss counties. Essentially what happens in many places in rural America are kids grow up, they go to college, they go to the university, they go to the big city, whichever one it happens to be, and they don't return home. And so we have a lot of this where I've worked, where I've lived. It's been my experience. However, our kingdom prospered in spite of all of this. And as I show you this Google map, this is a typical map of my previous institution and where enrollments came from. And again, you have to remember, this is not one of the major institutions. Western Oklahoma State College is a rural institution in southwest Oklahoma. And sure, that the Air Force presence makes a difference, but enrollments have grown and continue to grow, and we've got a little more discussion of that coming on later. But this is an amazing thing to me. None of us are protected by geography anymore. So the question becomes, how did all of this come to pass? Well, again, we get back to the finances of it, and it's a coincidence that my bosses have had great expectations for technology, and they don't want to pony up any money. And so there was a Dilbert cartoon where the great IT servant Dilbert was given some directions by the pointy-headed boss and said, go build a global telecommunications network and your budget's $12,000. That's really pretty similar to what I experienced and have experienced. So the evil IT director, yes, that is yours truly. That was another portion of the China trip, actually in the real Shangri-La, or near what was assumed to be the real Shangri-La, was forcing all in the learning kingdom. We were using a proprietary LMS. When one of our faculty stumbled upon Moodle, at this point in time, I generally have lots of teachers, faculty in the room, and I always just to give them kudos, because one of the things IT I don't think does real well is listens to its constituency. And I think if we just listen, sometimes it's amazing what we will learn. I will say basically this was roughly 2004. We downloaded Moodle, installed it. It basically has ran ever since. Of course, this is a little different audience. Sometimes I'm explaining who Martin is, but again, as we continue the fairy tale, we're talking about the tool given to us by the great LMS Knight. The tool grew in stature year by year. And again, these are Google Trends. Essentially, the blue line is Moodle, and we can see where it was many long years ago and how it has trended out. We know is what has happened. We also can look at this chart and just kind of give you an idea of how long I've been involved in the Moodle world. And as the story continues, the people of the learning kingdom even saw small children learning with Moodle. All the people begin shouting, "How can this be free?" There we go. Many skeptics were converted and believed, and things began to change as the old ways began to disappear. I suppose this is where the fairy tale really starts. And again, I said a little bit earlier, our experience in 2004 was we basically installed Moodle, and it is, in my experience, it has run ever since. There are some challenges though, and there's lots of things going on. We were running a Linux-based mail system, and we really began running Google Apps for Education in 2007. My current institution, Casper College, began running it in May of 2008. We actually did an integration for Google Apps and Moodle a little bit before Moodle Rooms did here, and so I mean there's lots of things to leverage. It's one of the very powerful things. We also began looking at various uses for this tool. This particular slide represents our question whether we should use clicker systems in the classroom or Google Docs with mobile devices. We do have both things going right now. The trouble with the clickers is there's 6 different systems on our particular campus, and we're a small campus of 4,500 students. And so we're starting to run into some budgetary times. The state of Wyoming has not seen the trouble the rest of the United States has had as far as budgets go in the United States. But again, we're starting to see it. So people are becoming more interested in tools that they can leverage. I also call this presentation Unplugging from the Commercial Software Good, not Unplugged. I will have to say, yeah, I use Microsoft stuff, and I still like them. One of the things I like, and I always go back to the days when I was teaching computer applications years ago, when you had multiple applications where the menuing systems were different. You had a whole different learning curve in those days. And Microsoft did, in my view, bring some consistency to those menus. It gave us something to work with where we could focus on what the tool actually does than worrying about spending a whole lot of time training people how to use menuing systems. Okay, we'll have a little bit of a pause here. Can everybody still hear me? Ah, there we go. There we go. To most people on the street, and I'm really talking non-technical people, open source means free. It's some free tool that's out there. And we know, generally when we're talking about the source code, it's freely and publicly available, but there's generally some license agreements that should allow us to do some things with the code. And I will say, as we moved along in 2012, open's not an absolute, but I would suggest that it's a continuum along which various content and services can be arrayed. And so this gets to really the heart and soul of what I'm talking about. One of the things that happened, and even beginning in 2004, the idea of value was, and of there being software that was free was pretty hard for people to accept. And so I began compiling my list of reasons why it was a good idea to go with open source. And so open source tools such as Moodle, the one that most of us are familiar with, are perfectly viable from many perspectives. But I will tell you, you do have to ask and answer questions like this. I suppose this one's relevant. What if someone buys it? More than once in the last few weeks, I've had to explain that Moodle wasn't purchased. It was a partner that was purchased by Blackboard. The code is not for sale. It's still freely available. It's really a non-issue. You have to answer the question, don't you get what you pay for? And again, this is less the case because I think some people are beginning to understand that open source is not 3 guys working on a project in a shed. There's perfectly viable business models. What happens if the guy dies? I suppose that's a legitimate question as well. I think we'd all be sad like this little guy if Santa Claus actually died, but we don't have to worry about that. And generally in this discussion, when you're justifying it to administrators, this becomes a little bit of a big deal as well. That there are partners, there are foundations, depending on the open source project, but it's another non-issue. Um, Back to the Moodle partner, the question usually revolves around who do you call at 2 a.m. I've got a couple different projects here. Of course, we've open sourced Moodle. We were actually at my previous institution, we open sourced our phone system with the Switchbox version of Asterisk. It's been running there for almost a year, pretty rock solid. There's another example in Texas where Sam Houston State open sourced their phone system with the Asterisk. The question always comes up, well, won't this be the same issue? Won't you have the same issues that Sam Houston State and Texas had if your key guys go away? Well, the answer is no. One of the things that I do recommend when people ask the question is what kind of business models are being built around your open source project? My newest favorite project is the Quali Enterprise Administrative System. Again, just like in the Moodle world, we have very, very talented Moodle partners. Various business models are being built up around these open source projects, and I think it's a very good and reasonable measure of whether an open source project is usable and sustainable. And here's the other question, but open source is not free. Everybody says you still have to have staffing, hosting, and training. The reality is that is the case no matter what you do. Really, in my view, licensing is where you look at it. And of course, in licensing, I put a little bit of a nice chunk above the water on the Moodle example. It's probably pretty much overkill. One of the things that we all know in terms of the licensing in our Moodle world is that as your enrollment increases, you don't have those incremental increases in licensing. It's a pretty tremendous feeling. Will we need a developer? Again, here, maybe not. It depends on your relationship with Moodle partners, whether you're going to self-host, that sort of thing. But if you do self-host and you are going to need a developer, the good part is the number I have up here is 75,000 American dollars versus zero. That was the ballpark the last time I checked on what my institution would have paid to license D2L. Blackboard, of course, was up from there. And if I would happen to have needed a developer, I actually had some. But if I would have needed another one, the finances were there. They were in place. Can it grow with us? There I always refer to examples such as the Open University in the UK, the very large institutions that have leveraged the power of Moodle to grow their enrollments, and and we've talked about the scalability there, and that's what administrators and faculty want to know. Can it do everything we need? I like to say, my first love is Moodle. There is no doubt, but my new favorite passion, I suppose, is Quali. And so really this question is more about open source than Moodle. And I will say, if the culture were correct where I'm at right now, I believe the tools are in place to open source the entire educational enterprise. I don't know that we could have said that 5 years ago, but things like Quali have come about. We all know about Moodle. Everything from OpenOffice, and it's really not open source, but if you decide to use some sort of mail service such as Google, in terms of the educational world, it's free. But I would say there's a resounding yes to this question. And I'm not sure we could have said that just a few years ago. Here's the other things and the questions that I've encountered. And again, this really is just a story. It's a story of the questions I've encountered since really 2004. And when you start talking about open source and people object, and it's the experts who are objecting. I had a conversation recently with one of our vendors, a very, very talented integrator of technology services, and they talk about the same things that are issues in the commercial world. Unstable software, insecure software, availability of support, legal issues. I used to do when I would go through this slide, I would sneeze the word Microsoft, and it goes Microsoft, and it seems like Microsoft is not the biggest and baddest villain on the block anymore. But all of those issues are exactly what we've talked about with commercial software for years and years and years. I do like to talk about this one because, in general, open source projects they're at least as well written as leading commercial projects, and they are enthusiastically supported. I am so excited to be doing this discussion today because I will say those of you who are on this session right now are those who I'm talking about in the second bullet, who enthusiastically support projects such as this. And again, as opposed to knowledge-free call centers where we're paying for support fees, one of the things that really sold me, even back in 2004, was the community. We were paying for support contracts for WebCT, and almost inevitably we would log a call for help. We were running Moodle side by side. We would post a question to one of the forums, and almost every single time the question going to the Moodle forums was answered before we received a call back from the support agreement we were paying. And so, there's some tremendous things about the community. The community is maybe the most powerful thing. I don't think we really emphasize that enough. I was in my hometown in eastern Colorado this past week, and it's one of those small towns where I made a phone call and I called the wrong number. I called the wrong number and I ended up talking to the guy for 15 minutes. I've decided that if I go back home again, the phone number sequence at this place in Springfield, Colorado starts with 523. I think I could call 523 and any four random digits, and I would connect with someone who could at least get me in touch with the information that I need. I think the Moodle world is a lot like that. It is like the small town. Of course, Moodle we know is huge, but it is like the small town where everybody knows everybody. And even when you call the wrong number, they're still there to help you. And that is an amazing thing. It's part of the power of our community. Open source again also is at least as good as our leading expensive commercial products. They're deeply buggy. They're usually poorly supported without steep support agreements, and they're usually poorly supported if you pay for expensive support agreements. And we've already talked about the legal vulnerability. We've seen commercial products, and they're engaged in multiple lawsuits all over the place. Let's see. There we go. I really break this down, and a lot of this again is for administrators and for faculty who are really struggling with this whole open source thing. I think you have to emphasize that the good part of our world. And I think these are things when you're putting a checklist together for why open source is good. There are some things you need to think about. A significant user base, check. You need to look for coders who are posting regular updates. You need to look for a situation where there's venture capitalists, major companies, or a foundation, and we want a standard open source license. I think those are very important as you're building comfort as you go out and you talk to users who are a little bit uncomfortable with this whole concept of open source. And again, I'm working on a blog post, and I'm probably going to use it next week. I'm doing a various version of this talk at the Montana Moodle Moot. But there's still a lot of voices out there who are coming and talking about, well, it's open source. You may not have the availability of support. And so these these things that you go in and you use to justify your projects and your open source tools are very important. The bad, and again, I use some of this. I've got a couple of my favorite projects, which are one guy working from his garage who posted an update 3 years ago who says, yeah, go ahead and use it. There's some really good tools out there, and they built their tool just like the rest of the open source world because of a need that was out there. But for the organization, for the institution, for the enterprise, sometimes this may not be the right choice of a project. The ugly part of this is, the absolutely ugly part of this is some people don't think they have a choice. They think you're tied into support agreements. They think they have to go buy the most expensive tool, and it's just absolutely false. And I always want to emphasize that as we move through this. I will say I'm over there being one way to do things. I would consider myself what I would call a modern IT director, not old school. It is just different. There's not one way to do things. There's not a periodic table of the internet where we can organize our thoughts. It doesn't work like this, although sometimes I wish it would. What has really happened, and this is probably the most important slide of this talk, is when you're going in and you're supporting IT, and even if you're coming out from the user end, we all know this is true. 10 years ago, when I was supporting the enterprise, we had enterprise-based tools that only I could deliver. I could not go out and buy my own instance of WebCT. It wasn't possible. But we had this whole consumer technology arena that we have out there. And what I tell people is that it is amazing to me that if I own my own domain name, kentbrooks.com, which I happen to do, and I want to go purchase some sort of hosting plan with a number of hosting services, I can go for $10 a year. I have my own domain name. For $10 a month, I can probably have a hosting service that'll probably have a one-click install of Moodle that I can bring to play to the enterprise, even a small enterprise, and use it for professional development, for my business, for my school, for my university, whatever it happens to be. And the crazy part about this is I've been the director of the old school IT shop. As the enterprise, I cannot often provide as good a tools that satisfy the user as they can get out on the street with some of the consumer-based technologies. Some of those don't do everything for the enterprise, but you absolutely have to understand this and start thinking about the correct mixture of tools. So what are the reasons for all of us doing this? I actually have a couple more that I'm going to add to this, and I'll just talk about those, excuse me. But we'll start with number one. Here's the reality. All the really smart people work for someone else and live somewhere else. Heck, I would place a bet all of you that are listening to this are smarter than me. The power of this whole community is I have access to you and your skills and your experience. And that is just an amazing thing. Reason number two, I don't think we have to ration technology for instruction. If you talk about it from a financial perspective, if I am saving, say, $75,000 a year on LMS licensing, and I don't buy a developer, I can reallocate those to commercial tools that I like. Or I can buy instructional support help. There's lots of ways that we can go and get additional resources for technology, which very positively influence instruction. This is still related. We can give our students and teachers a better selection of tools, both commercial and non-commercial. We will save money on licensing. You're going to have other issues regardless, but licensing is one place you will save money for reallocation. This is one of my favorite ones. And I go back to the phone system that we deployed right before I left my previous job. Free will allow us to automate humanization. Small institutions, small staffs, sometimes you really get frustrated because you just don't have enough bodies to get all of the tasks done that are needed. You just need extra help. This is kind of scary from my perspective a little bit. It's a little bit big brotherish, but if you call my previous institution with their asterisk-based system, and again, it's a vendor-supported asterisk-based solution. If you're in their database, they will pull up on their screen as your call is coming in, your file, and they'll be able to answer you by name. Hello, Andrew, Dana, David, Paula. They'll be able to call you by name. If it doesn't have your number, it will Google everything about your number, and that information will be at their fingertips. A very interesting and amazing thing. Free drives innovation. I always throw this one up here. You know, you talk about the development of the use of R&D dollars. You had, I would say, far superior innovation in the open source world when you have the power of community, the peer production model coming about, and you having very talented people contributing to a project. You know, mobile is going to force us to look for solutions which are not in the box. We have to start looking for out-of-the-box solutions, and so the places that we can build structure, and I don't really call Moodle an LMS anymore. I call Moodle an aggregator, and it's an aggregator for a lot of things. It's an aggregator for our course content. It's an aggregator for some of our library resources. We use it in that fashion, and I'm really trying to get people to think about it in that fashion, and that's going to be important. Reason number 8, I'm skipping back. I told you I'm going to add a couple things to this. One of these is the one I've really talked about it a lot during this session, but it is the power of community. The fact that we really help each other out is a reason to do this. The other thing that I'm going to add to this is vendor churn. Vendor churn is usually used differently. It's usually brought about from the vendor side, and they're talking about churning and they're talking about controlling cash flow and offering up different versions. But I look at vendor churn from my perspective, and I hate vendor churn because really what is happening is they're churning through revisions, additions, upgrades, and I don't have any control over it. I think this particular world, using open source and non-commercial software tools, give us more control over vendor churn as I define it. You know, I think all of us want to survive and survive well. We have some tremendous challenges. I think there will be institutions that don't survive. You know, I look at scarce resources. I look at the duplication of effort between institutions, and you know, I want to be an institution that survives, and I want to survive well. I don't want to survive and really have to cut back on services to students. I want to give them the best and give them their money's worth when they're actually paying for a service. And I think that's something that this world can allow us to do. And again, I think we're at an interesting point. I think we're at a point where we really could open source the entire enterprise, and that's really exciting to me. Oh, I did add vendor churn. I must have slept last night, so I apologize. So I don't have to add that one. So the question always comes at this point in the talk. You know, you always talk real positively about all these tools. What about some ones that you've utilized that didn't work? DimDim. Excuse me. DimDim for web conferencing was one that it started out very, very, very good, and it was for web conferencing and sharing. Really, probably an Adobe Connect competitor. It was one of those ones that ended up bringing out a commercial version, and then the open source version got ignored. So the regular updates ceased. Then we began using Big Blue Button shortly after we did that, and have used that for quite a while as well. ClamWin, I always try to make a pun out of this, and we almost had a antivirus calamity, and we tried to push out ClamWin as on the enterprise, and frankly, we just weren't smart enough. I guess we had to push it out, and we had to retreat and raise the white flag and surrender on that one. So I mean, there's some things, but again, I think that's part of as you go into this. One of the things that people sometimes don't like about communities such as ours is the religious fervor with which we come to it. I'm passionate about what we're doing. I'm passionate about what I see at the iMoot. I'm passionate about what the people who are listening to this are going to go out and do. And so we have to be willing to step back and say, well, this particular project didn't work. And I think people appreciate that. Again, I always like to have people walk away with things that they can utilize, and so I try to practice what I preach. This presentation was created with free tools, Jing for screen capture, Paint.net for imaging and editing, and the education version of Prezi for the presentation. So there's so many more tools that are available. I mean, there's great options. I guess with that, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions. Yeah, I see, Dana. I agree exactly with you on the dim dam. When it was getting decent, it did go commercial. So I mean, just questions, comments. The information up on the screen at this point is my contact information. I do work for Casper College in Casper, Wyoming. I do have a blog, and I since I've moved, I've kind of slacked off a little bit. But as we've gotten settled, I've started posting more often, and so it's at kentbrooks.com. My email, of course, there is kentbrooks@kentbrooks.com, and my Twitter handle is @kentbrooks. So, do you have any questions at this point? Any thoughts? Suggestions? Ah, there we go. Andrew's typing something. Okay, I think that's a misconception of open source that it's in development. We'll go commercial when it finally gets good. I agree. I agree. I think it's a little bit of a sales. I think it's a little bit of a sales job there to phase in and bring pieces on board from your open source world that will help people succeed early and succeed often, and then really emphasize the good. It hasn't happened in Linux. Going back to Andrew, how heavily do we use Google Apps? My previous institution was fully converted to Google Apps. Students, faculty. Again, we did write a homebrew integration with Moodle and Google Apps, probably in the 2008 timeframe, and so I used it completely there. Of course, use it on a personal basis. We're in the process at my current institution of moving faculty and staff to Google Apps. Our students are already Google Apps, and we have a process of we have a go. Our G Day or Google Day is October 17th, so we'll be going to Gmail and Google Apps. I think Google Apps. I use Google Apps tremendously heavily. I mean, very heavily. We're trying to sell it a little bit for some classroom applications like Google Forms in lieu of clickers. We've got a little talk in Montana next week that's going to talk about Google Apps in lieu of clickers and using that in conjunction with QR codes and that sort of thing. But I think Google. I use Google Apps very heavily. I guess I'm forcing my department to use it. And we've got some champions that we're here on campus that we're going to really rally around to get even more use of it. All right, we got two questions coming. Andrew and Paula, what do we got going today? Um, no particular issues with Google Apps. And I'll go ahead and carry on that a little bit. Uh, about the Google Apps thing. So I've been getting the question a lot about why didn't you go with Microsoft Live? Really, for our first instance, for my first conversion to Google Apps in '07, Microsoft didn't have a cloud-based product. It wasn't an option. And when I came here, there was already an installed base of Google Apps um, running for students, and so I really think Microsoft Live is a product that at least should be taken into consideration. It's there. You know, they're doing some things. It's always kind of I don't like seeing stuff. I think Microsoft actually paid the University of Nebraska like $1 million to deploy it, so they'd have um, a major player using Microsoft Live. But I have no doubt that the product is fairly good. But in terms of particular issues, you have to really sell it for what it is. I do have a document that I can share with you if you'll remind me. Shoot me your email address. It's called Our Rationale for Using Google Docs for Education, and I have the document from my previous institution and the one we wrote. The one we wrote. I can put it on my. I can put it on. You guys, I can share that document on this web page with the content for this session. But it's called A Rationale for Using Google Apps at Western Oklahoma State College, and I wrote another one, Rationale for Using Google Apps. Um, I think some of the key issues that, back to answering the question, are you have to make people understand that the Google spreadsheet is not Microsoft Excel. The functionality is not, I can post it to the forum. The functionality is not the same in Google spreadsheets as it is in Microsoft Excel. And so if you use it, you have to build some expectation into it that if you're going to work on a document collaboratively and build the base of a document that is going to have to later go public, say to a board or whatever, my suggestion is you create it first in Google, in the Google spreadsheet or the Google presentation tool or the Google word processor, and then take it to your Microsoft Word or Excel for the final editing, because there are some weaknesses there. We have some reasons in the rationale document for setting up two different Google Apps domains, and one of the problems we've been having is an issue of getting to use it with our portal, use both domains with our portal correctly, and that's a little bit of an issue that I think will get worked out. I don't have an answer for that because we don't have it resolved, but that's maybe one of the issues. I think for the everyday user, the issue of the tools not being quite as robust as the Microsoft Office tools is probably your biggest issue with Google Apps. Can you post a resource about the clicker thing? I can. I've actually got it's a private college Google site with some information about it, and I'll have to dig that up, and I'll either post it to my blog or somewhere. I'll post it somewhere. I don't know. Like I say, I'll have to pull that stuff together on the clicker item. Yeah, I agree. The collaborative value of Google Apps outweighs the issue, and that's what I sell hard and all day long and every day. I can create tools. Like I say, I'm so excited. I can create this rationale document, and then you guys want this, and I can share it. I'm collaborating with you guys wherever you happen to be, and that's tremendous. The power of that whole peer production model where we can all add value where we can add value is tremendous, very powerful. And educators are an interesting lot. sometimes traditionally I think we've not shared as well as we should have, and I think education is sharing, so we sometimes have to get over that a little bit. I think I'm a little bit done. I think I was supposed to be somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour. But what other questions? Any other things that you want to look at or talk about related to this topic? I will add. I'm gonna mention the Kuali thing one more time. Is anybody out there familiar with Kuali? Okay. Kuali, and I'll write it here. Kuali is something you need to watch from the educational world. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on it. Kuali, just as Moodle was developed to service a need, or as most open source projects are developed to service a need. And here's Kuali. It's Kuali.org. It's a project that was developed at the University of Indiana, and they built it because they have they were tired of their legacy financial accounting system. And so they started with the financial accounting system, and they started adding tools. There's some really great tools. There's a library tool, and lots of basically administrative human resource tools is coming. But you have really probably the three big players are the University of Indiana, Stanford University, and Cornell, and they've built a better mousetrap. Administrative systems are terribly expensive. And again, one of my previous slides says they're poorly supported with steep support agreements. That'd be my assessment of where administrative systems are in general. But Kuali is changing things and bringing some very powerful open source with a great community, just like Moodle, to the administrative computing side. And it's built for education, primarily higher education, but there's going to be some great benefits that come together, and it's one that all of us Moodlers should be aware of. I don't know that I'll ever get a chance to deploy it in my career. You know, we are a Datatel / SunGuard, aka Lucian, whatever they call themselves today, since they bought and merged and all of that. But it's going to be a big player. It's something that people need to be aware of. Has some great ideas. That's all I have. Boy, I'd love to. I'll get some resources reposted. I'll post some stuff to the forum. I think I've got. Let me get my list. I've got the Google apps, the clickers, the Google Apps rationale, the clicker stuff. I'll start with the Google Apps rationale. The clicker stuff I'm going to have to gather together, and I need to do that. Some of our guys are doing a presentation next week. I think I mentioned that, but we'll get that for you. Well, thank you guys so much for participating today. Hope this has been useful.
Hi, Ken. I'd just like to add from everyone at Pukunui, we really appreciate you going to the effort of creating the presentation and being a part of iMoot. It's been a pleasure having you.
It's been an honor and a pleasure from my end as well. Thank you. All right, I'm off to the forum. If anybody's left, I'm off to the forum to post a few resources.
See you, Ken. Thanks a lot again.
Bye-bye.